Thank you, Sanal, and thank you all of you for keeping to time, even though I know I'm exercising a hard hand here. But over the last three speakers, we've been made to think about not only larger geographies of freedom, whether it's Sri Narayana Guru going to Sri Lanka, whether it's the imagination of Dr. Palpu, the oceanic imagination of Dr. Palpu. In the case of Poigail Yohanan, the link to a large geography of slavery and of bondage, which he summons up. And it's also this question of, and the important question that Sanal raised, of this question of time, that there is this notion among all reformers of this living in, whether it's Vakkom Moulavi or any of the people we'll be speaking about today, of living in a degraded time, and this notion of salvific time, the time of salvation, that time needs rejuvenation, that we need to redefine our notions of time, is another central issue that we need to think with. So this question of space-time, which takes us beyond this narrow strip of land called Keralam, and forces us to think with much wider geographies, because most of these reformers were not only going back into the past, they were traversing very wide geographies and trying to think, what exactly does this enterprise of recovering Buddhism mean? It's to go back a few thousand years in order to recover an ideology for the present and in order to recover a program for the present. So thank you for all of you for raising such a wide landscape of issues. Now over to you, Yasser, Makti Tangal and his importance.
Thank you, the foundation, and also Sajida, Hari Krishnan, and the others who are making it a very successful program. And I'm very happy to be part of it. Yeah. So now we'll travel from Travancore, the princely state of Travancore, to the region of Malabar, the colonial Malabar, where you have a very different kind of a trajectory with regard to the idea of modernity, the idea of parishkaram, and also, yeah, and the question of colonial state and so on and so forth. So I will begin with what Udayakumar said. In fact, he was referring to Vakkom Moulavi's notion of parishkaram. So when we look at deeply the kind of writings that happened before Vakkom Moulavi, and of course we are kind of referring to Sayyid Sanullah Makti Tangal, who was born in the present day Malappuram, and who also became the first Muslim Mapla Muslim, or Muslim who, not Mapla Muslim, the Muslim who wrote Malayalam prose. So he's the first person who wrote in Malayalam prose, that too in the last quarter of the 19th century. So of course, in fact, you had people who were writing in Malayalam, letters and so on and so forth, but we are talking about proper text, pamphlets, and also journals and so on and so forth. So, so in his Kutaram, so one of the first Malayalam prose written in Malayalam by a Mapla, or a Muslim, sorry. So he tries to locate the whole question of parishkaram. So what is to be a parishkari Muslim? So the fundamental question I'm trying to ask here is how Makti Tangal tries to place modernity as well as Maplas. So one of the fundamental questions he's asking in his writing is, who is a good Mapla, or who is a good Muslim? So what are the conditions? What are the requirements to be a good Muslim in the 19th century, living in a colonial territory? So according to him, language plays a very, very major, important role in the shaping of a good Muslim. So in fact, he is the first person who's also kind of hierarchizing languages, the kind of languages a good Mapla Muslim or a good Muslim need to have in the 19th century in the wake of colonial penetration in the region. So, of course, we have been talking about Arabic Malayalam and the importance of Arabic Malayalam and so on and so forth. But according to Makti, Arabic Malayalam is a rustic language. It needs to be removed from the life of Muslims. It doesn't have any relevance. Of course, interestingly, he was also writing in Arabic Malayalam. That is a different question altogether. But so he says that you need to be very, very familiar with three kinds of bhashas, means Rajabhasha, Rajyabhasha, Madhubhasha, and Natubhasha. So this is the kind of hierarchy that he's creating. So you need to be very familiar and well-versed in your Rajabhasha. That means the language of the state. The Rajyabhasha, the language of the region. And so then he also talks about another language, the Hindustani language, is the Rajya Bhasha, that patriotic language. So in fact, what you find is that for him, this language question is very, very important to create an aspirational Mapila or a Muslim community, a mobile Muslim community, and also very, very importantly, an employable Muslim community. So, of course, in fact, I'll come back to this question of language later. And much before Vakkom Moulavi, in fact, we should also, we can also reflect on the kind of commonalities and differences that you find in the writings of Makti Tangal and Vakkom Moulavi. And of course, that's another entirely different kind of a discussion. So, and another important thing he would say that, in fact, one of the very important thing he did is actually he created or designed a territory-based Muslim community in the wake of colonialism. That means he was completely against this transnational kind of or pan-Islamic notion of Ummah. So he did not believe in it. So he actually believed in the local, plural, vernacular kind of a Mapla. So a Malayali Mapla. So that is the term he is using. He's not using a global. He's not talking about a global Ummah here. He's basically talking about a vernacular Ummah, which is kind of rooted in Malayalam language, and they're also asked to learn English. Because, without this language, you cannot really negotiate with the colonial state. And of course, he's a loyalist, we should not forget that. He's a colonial loyalist. And of course, he was actually working with the colonial administration. And he also says that, in fact, you need to have this kuru. That means this kind of intimate kind of loyalty with the colonial state. Because according to Makti, colonial state is your desired pattern. That means, in order to be a good Muslim, you need to support the colonial state. So, and of course, in fact, we have to read those things in the context of the time, and also the kind of resources, and also the kind of discourses he was part of, and also kind of knowledge he was, information he was gathering from the region and also from across the world. So, wait. Yeah, I'll have 2 more minutes, I guess. And in Kerala, so when you look at the kind of discourses you have today, Makti Tangal has been kind of appropriated by all kinds of Muslim organizations. So the traditional Muslim organizations or the scholars, in fact, they would say that, okay, so Makti Tangal is part of us. So in fact, his ideas, so he shared a lot of things with us. The Mujahid or the Salafite or kind of organizations and the scholars, they also have a kind of very peculiar kind of love and hate relationship with Makti Tangal. And Jamaat Islami, the political Islamist kind of groups, in fact, they also have this kind of love and hate relationship with this person. So, what I'm trying to say is that so there is a colonial loyalist who wanted to shape a new or a good Mapila, and also ask them to, not to resent the colonial state, because resenting colonial state is against Islam. So in fact, you can become murtad. That means the person who kind of negating or negated the whole idea of Islam. So another important thing, much before Foucault and kinds of people, in fact, talk about the association with the knowledge, power, and everything. So you have this 19th century scholar who would say that vivaramillengil amaramilla. There is no power without knowledge. So this is one of the major statement he makes in Kadoru Kudoram, that you cannot have any kind of power unless you gain knowledge. English, Malayalam, all kinds of languages. In fact, it's actually opening up the possibility of the languages. In fact, of course, Makti Tangal is the one person who actually, kind of presented the possibility and the relation between employment, aspirations, mobility, and also ambitions, right? So, so I said the territorial Islam. And so one of the commonalities, and so what I'm trying to say is that, so the last thing I want to tell you today is that he would say that Europe has nothing to do with modernity. Europe did not discover the New World. They did not discover India. They did not discover the America. So it is basically the Muslims. So the Muslims are to be the Jnana Guru, the knowledge teachers for the world. So that is the term he uses, the Jnana Guru. So then they should also think about their Jnana Bhuta Kalam, the knowledge past, and they have to reclaim this knowledge past. Right? So that is the only way. So in a way, so we can actually see the emergence of a proto-decolonial kind of a scholar who is kind of, engaging with colonial state as a loyalist and also kind of disengaging at the same time. So it's a very fascinating kind of a thing. So what I want to tell you that, in fact, he would say that without science, Shastramillengil Vikasamilla. Right? Shastramillengil Vikasamilla. So, and he also says that, so without knowledge, Arivillengil Nanamilla. Nanamillengil Manamilla. That means without knowledge there is no pride, without pride there is no shame. Right? So, he continuously engaged with the idea of Parishkaram. And another important thing, you just have to tell me when you have to, I have to stop, okay? So, the last thing, he also creates this binary of Parishkaram and Parihasam. That means, if you are not Parishkari, you will be humiliated. That means, kind of what you say, you will be scorned upon, right? So he actually creates, so he is consistently, in fact, he has written extensively, and of course, I don't want to give the details of this text, extensively, America, Kandavararunda. No, so he also, kind of continuously talks about Sneham, the idea of Sneham, idea of Maitri. That without the Veda Sneham, Natu Sneham, Jnana Sneham, Rajya Sneham, Raja Sneham, Bhasha Sneham, so all kinds of multitude of, what you say, love. Right? Not pyar, the Sneham as we understand today. So, I will stop here now, and of course we'll get back as he said. Thank you.
I'm in the unfortunate position of having to curtail people's eloquence. As they get more heated in their argument, I have to cut them short. But here again, Yasser has raised a series of questions, particularly about Makti Tangal. It's interesting that we need to think beyond these categories of loyalist and nationalist and so on. There is a way in which you've written the history of modern India as a huge titanic battle between nationalism and colonialism, and there is much else to be said. So what we see here is somebody who is politically loyalist, but intellectually quite an insurrectionary, right? When he talks about Muslims as becoming a Jnana Guru of the world and so on, and obviously harking back, I suppose, to the classical period of Islam and so on. The other question that actually comes up is this question of medium and of language, which has come through all of these talks. And how exactly is one to get one's message across, right? Do you create a new form of language, a more demotic language? Do you as a Muslim engage with Arabic Malayalam or English? Do you write do you produce a newspaper and edit? Do you write pamphlets, tracts, books? So this option, the practical options of instituting reform. And here again with Makti Tangal, we have a whole series of questions like that. But I also like the idea of the local Mapla, right? So we've been constantly invoking the global here and much larger geographies. And Makti Tangal is concerned with this question of how do we reconstitute the Mapla locally, right? amidst all of the changes that is happening. So that's again a whole set of questions that we can come back to in the audience questions. And finally, Vinil, who will speak to us for another 10 minutes. Yeah. What's the title of your... From Caste to Citizenship, it will be speaking specifically on Ayyangali. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My title is From Caste to Citizenship, Ayyangali's Vision for Public Space in Travancore. First, I would like to read one news from an old newspaper, Atma Poshani. It's published from Thrissur. Sodeshamani Krishnapilla was the editor of that newspaper, and also he was a columnist in that paper. The news is that 1901 Malayalam Varsham തിരുവിതാംകൂറിലെ സുഭാഷിണി പത്രത്തിൻ്റെ പത്രാധിപരായ P.K. ഗോവിന്ദപിള്ളയ്ക്ക് ഊരിട്ടമ്പലം സർക്കാർ പള്ളിക്കൂട പ്രവേശനം സംബന്ധിച്ചുണ്ടായ ലഹളയും അത് നിമിത്തം പുലയർക്ക് നേരിട്ട സങ്കടങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ചും സുഭാഷിണിയിൽ പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിക്കാൻ അയ്യങ്കാളി 14 ലേഖനങ്ങൾ എഴുതി നൽകിയെന്നും അതിലൊന്നുപോലും ഗോവിന്ദപിള്ള പ്രസിദ്ധീകരിച്ചില്ലെന്നും ഈ ഒഴിവാക്കൽ വാർത്ത അയ്യങ്കാളി മറ്റൊരു പത്രമായ ദേശാഭിമാനിയിൽ ദീർഘമായ ഒരു ലേഖനത്തിലൂടെ പുറം ലോകത്തെ അറിയിച്ചെന്നും ആണ്. It's also Sodeshabhimani is one of the newspaper from Kollam. I think sorry, Deshabhimani Patram. TK. Okay. Ayyangali stands a pivotal anti-caste leader in Travancore, and his legacy faces ongoing reinterpretation by various social and political groups. These efforts often detach his initiatives from their historical context to suit contemporary ideological agendas. As a result, Ayyangali's contributions are frequently romanticized or appropriated, reducing his political radicalism to oversimplified narratives. While Dalit intellectuals and activists have documented his life and struggles, their works often limit themselves to biographical accounts, portraying him as either a god-like figure or a brave reformer who defied caste oppression. The available writings on Ayyangali, though instrumental in perceiving his legacy, often lack historical contextualization. Early biographers like T.H.P. Chandarasheri relied heavily on oral accounts and archival fragments, presenting Ayyangali as a heroic figure without critically engaging with the broader historical dynamics. Such biographical studies, while valuable, tend to adopt elements of fiction and drama, as observed by Pata Chatterjee in his critique of vernacular histories. To construct an alternative history of Ayyangali, it is essential to integrate diverse sources, oral testimonies, archival records, and vernacular narratives while maintaining a critical political perspectives rooted in the experience of the Pulaya caste. We know Ayyangali was born in August 28, 1863 in Venganur, a small village near Thiruvananthapuram, capital city of Travancore. He belonged to the Pulaya caste, traditionally categorized as an agrestic slaves. His parents were Mala and Ayyan. His father served as a head of the Pulayas in their village and was a tenant of a Nair landlord. Ayyangali emerged as the first prominent leader from the slave caste in Travancore, and also he was the first legislative member in Travancore and also in Indian Congress. Actually, when I read Ayyangali's biographies and his speech, his legislative assembly speeches, it's totally I'm confused. It's we will get a lot of contradiction, because he always says in Praja Sabha, I am from Hindu Pulaya communities and I only stand for Hindus. At the same time, he did not attend any temple entry movement or the temple related issues in the public. So it's as a history student, his life, I feel it's a totally contradiction in some points. So I read some major points. Ayyangali is a key figure in the Pulaya struggle, focused on the fight for access to public roads, market and schools. These spaces were deemed public but were largely inaccessible to oppressed castes due to caste-based restrictions like untouchability and unapproachability, with entrenched social exclusion and spatial immobility in late 19th and early 20th century Travancore. Utilization of modern resources. Ayangali effectively used colonial roads, state-established schools, and the growing print culture to integrate his community into Travancore society. Modern organizational structure. The Sadhujana Paribalana Sangam was a modern organization. He established one movement for Pulayas. Modern organization with a democratic framework, including bylaws, conducted regular meetings, subscription fees, elected leadership, widespread branches, etc. Modern method of agitation. Ayangali employed constitutional methods like petitioning to achieve his goals. Thomas Vadiyar, his secretary, wrote the complaint. Ayangali, unlike the other leaders such as Srinarayana Guru and Chattambi Swamigal, refrained from invoking religious symbols or discourses. His secular stance was significant. Even the predominantly Hindu state of Travancore. Democracy was the central theme of Ayangali's activism, underscoring the need for equality and inclusion in all public spaces and societal structures. Ayangali's activism contested these boundaries, invoking modern ideas of democracy, equality, and rights to challenge caste-based segregation. His efforts were instrumental in making public space more inclusive and democratic. Rights and equality. Ayangali emphasized equal rights for all, advocating for freedom of movement, access to economic opportunities, and education for oppressed caste. In conclusion, Ayangali's life work were very important in Kerala history. He fought against caste oppression and worked hard to ensure education, dignity, and equal rights for Dalits. Despite some challenges and contradictions, his efforts helped bring into society in colonial Travancore. His legacy remind us that the fight for equality and justice is still relevant today and inspire us to continue working for the fairer society. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinil. And Vinil has raised again two very important questions. One is this question of what it is to recover these individual lives. How do we go about this? How do we reconstruct it? Do we reconstruct them as heroic figures, or do we see them as actors within a particular
recording in progress?
And the second question that he raised is the idea of the public sphere, because one of the prominent fights by Pulayas and Cheramas and Travancore and elsewhere was the right to be in public, to be seen, to walk, the actions that we take for granted in our everyday life, and raising the question of what it is to create a public sphere, not only of a physical presence, but the larger question of creating an intellectual presence in the public sphere, which comes up with Vakkom Moulavi or with Makti Tangal and so on, with their ceaseless writing and production of material, whether it's through the media or whether it is through the books and speeches that they made. So this question of the public sphere, whether it exists, the fractures within it, the exclusions within the public sphere, which allow us to qualify what social reform meant. Social reform was really, in many instances, the right of people to be where they were, and the right to be where they wanted to be. Very simple propositions. So we'll just take another round and then we'll get to the audience, because I really wanted to now focus in, since now you have an idea of this landscape of thinkers, to ask some questions which will hopefully reflect back on our conference. What is it to think about history through an individual, right? A heroic figure. And is this sufficient? And so Uday hinted at some of this when he said, when you think about Narayana Guru, we also have to think about Dr. Palpu and the Sri Narayana Dharma Parivalana Yogam. So what is it to think about history through an individual? The second is that all of these individuals in many senses are using religion and redefining religion as a way of thinking about society. So religion is not about the other world, religion is about the here and now, right? Where Madam relates to Samuham in a very direct way. And perhaps we could speak about that. And again, the third question, the question of time. Because there is this attempt to go back to a glorious past or go back in order to recover resources for the present, to go back to Buddhism, to go back to the age of classical Islam, to go back to Christianity, and so on and so forth. Multiple ways of going back in order to address the future. So it's not looking back in awe or looking back which subordinates the individual to an idea of the glory of the past, but the past is a resource, that there exists a resource that has to be pragmatically and even opportunistically deployed to change the present. So perhaps you could address this cluster of questions. I'm not putting a time limit. Not that you should take an hour, but just brief comments, and then we can open it up to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important issues raised here. The question of individual in history and the formation of subjectivity in particular, which is very relevant in the context of the writings and speech acts of the Guru and Poigail Appachan as well. Because Poigail Appachan himself, I hope Dr. Sanal would elaborate it. It's from him that you have that keen sense of searching and probing the history from below. കാണുന്നതിൽ ഒരു അക്ഷരവും എൻ്റെ വംശത്തെപ്പറ്റി കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. അനേക വംശത്തിൻ ചരിതങ്ങൾ, എൻ്റെ വംശത്തിൻ ചരിതം എഴുതി വെച്ചിടുവാൻ അന്ന് ഈ ഉറുവിയിൽ ആരും ഇല്ലാതെ പോയല്ലോ. സോ ദാറ്റ് ലമെൻറ്റേഷൻ of Appachan is also very significant here. So I think it is through subjectivity that we perceive history or reality or the past or past, and somehow selectively try to represent it in the compulsions and problems of the present. That's why we are having this conference also on Vakkom Moulavi, the context of totalitarianism and hegemonization of culture and society that is leading us to rethink on our own masters of modernity like Vakkom Moulavi or Bhakti Tanga. And the other issue that you raised is that of time, or one more issue. Yes, religion and society. Again, from the context of Narayana Guru's and Sahodana Ayyappan's praxis, we can say that it is a pluralistic view of religion that Kerala's unique modernity is having. It's not fixing on anything like the traditional religions. Though I have elaborated on Buddhism, modern form of Buddhism in Kerala, it was never a religious movement. It was only a cultural and socio-political kind of movement to mobilize the people and make them aware of their own traditions, the Ashokan tradition of South India and Kerala. Kerala itself is addressed by Ashoka, Keraputho, BC 3rd century. That is the first epigraphical and archaeological reference to Kerala and Keraputha or Cheramakkal, literally translated into Tamil. It occurs in BC 3rd century in the edicts of Ashoka. So it was largely pluralistic kind of thing as far as Guru and Sahodaran are concerned. And we have that insistence on religion as opinion and freedom of opinion. Guru was upholding that the freedom of expression and opinion. And whenever you have that change, you have to change instantly. That was his liberal view. And also in 1925, he declared that there is nothing called Hinduism. There is nothing, Hindu madam ennoru madam thanne illallo. That was what you call the finest statement of the Guru. 1925, at the birth of the RSS, he declared, just a few days after the inauguration of the RSS, Guru declared in Kerala, and that appeared in Kerala Gaumadi. CV Raman has given that report. There is nothing called Hinduism. You have a plurality of Brahmanical, Vedic, and Shaiva and Vaishnava, and so many other, 18 such religious formations are mentioned, and there is nothing called Hinduism, if you can say about a Hinduism, you can also talk about a world religion. You can combine all the religions of history and the world of the humankind, and you can say that there is a world religion also. And also, even in his last message, 1927, Pallaturuthi, great message, he was insisting on this world religion. ലോകമതം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മാനവധർമ്മം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു ജാതി ഒരു മതം ഒരു ദൈവം മനുഷ്യർക്ക്, ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് ഹ്യൂമാനിറ്റി ഇറ്റ് സെൽഫ്. The caste and religion and God of humanity is humanity. Humanity itself is the lasting kind of value or virtue for the Guru. And also Sahodaran and others, they were also practicing that. They were never into a parochial, old revivalist kind of Buddhism, but Sahodaran saluted the Navayana, the modern form of Ambedkarite Buddhism, as a political and democratic kind of alternative for the present and future of India, especially in the constitutional context. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, these are really interesting questions. Now, about this thinking history through the individual. Now, the idea of the individual itself is what is at issue in some sense here. And there again, like it was very interesting what Vinil was saying when he was speaking about Ayangali biographies, because the history of biographization constructs a certain hero figure and as well, and you get a kind of, and then you try to invest it with a certain kind of psychological theatrics, that becomes important there. Now, if you step back and see how these people spoke about themselves, that's very interesting. And Narayana Guru, on the one hand, there is this the ascetics withdrawal in some sense, which Nizar Ahmad speaks about it as nirbadhyada, that is not being burdened by an obligation to anything, so to say. Yeah, and this is that is actually one of the ways in which he thinks about freedom, I would say. But on the other hand, there is also a sense of courage, a courage which is one of defiance of authority which is handed down. And this courage is not articulated as resistance in opposition to something, but it is articulated as a kind of absolute enjoyment of sovereignty. Now, this is important. This sovereignty comes from this sense of nirbadhyada, and that is related to a self-aware human being, which is understood also in spiritual or metaphysical terms. Like even in the context of Vaikam Satyagraham, Narayana Guru's comments, some of the things which were reported about him, what he says, was stressing courage and defiance rather than docility. Now, this is an important thing to keep in mind. And in Palpu, you get another sense, which is that of somebody acting as a representative for the community. That is again a new kind of positioning of the individual, which is coming up at that time. Now, very quickly to speak about this question of religion, already Ajay spoke about Narayana Guru's point that there is nothing called Hindu Madam. And he began speaking about something called Eka Madam. Now, this is an interesting idea. He says that if you can call Sankhya and Advaita and all the different darshanas in Hinduist thought as one religion, why can't you call Hindu thought, Christian thought, Buddhism, Islamic thought as one religion? Yeah? There is nothing called a Hindu thought as distinct from Christian or Islamic. They can also be seen as different facets of madam, so to say, which is opinion making in general. Now, this ought to be understood also in relation to Narayana Guru's relationship with other religions. We know that he organized the first all-religion conference in Kerala in 1923, and that was soon after the Malabar Rebellion, of course, just a couple of years after that. And there, of course, the idea here is that it is to inform and to know rather than to debate and to win. That was the motto of the conference. And in compositions like Anukamba Dashagam, you also find, along with The Hindu deities, you'll also find Muhammad Nabi and Christ and Buddha appearing as epitomes of compassion. So a different kind of imaginary which can actually keep the different religious figures together becomes important. So then we can...
Sanal? Sanal, are you with us now?
Yeah, very much.
Okay, so please could you
I'm here.
go ahead?
Okay, so can you hear me? Yes.
We can hear you, yes.
I think one of the problems when I look at P.K. Yohanan as an individual is a kind of prophetic power which he assumed at probably from the beginning of his career as a pastor or upadeshi. If I use the word current during his lifetime. So the people thought of him as a person who had the kind of, the ability to give a revealed message. Something similar to the Southern African John prophet who said that live and direct from the God. It's something similar to that had happened in Travancore, and in one of his epistles, he critiqued the biblical idea of revelation for the the selected people, and he said that those revelations were for them, but the revelation for the oppressed Pulayas and Parias of Travancore is through him. He said to quote him, revelation is through me. That's what he said. Through him. So I think if we take the biography of I guess one of the most important things is to talk about the prophetic power that he had assumed. This, I guess, is quite unique in Kerala at that point of time, in the sense that not many reformers or the people of that kind who had this sort of idea about a new society, new religious community, assume themselves to be prophets. And now it can happen, but then, in Johannan's case, he had used the language of Protestant Christianity, then moved beyond that, because within Protestant Christianity, it would be difficult for an individual to claim to be a prophet and subsequently, people thinking about himself as God, etc. So there are a lot of things to be said about that. I just want to signpost this. And the other question is, to show how this individual himself was transformed at one point of time, is to think about his assuming of this prophetic power. That's the point I wanted to emphasize. The other one is to talk about how history has become significant. Just now Ajay has mentioned that. And I think that's quite substantial as far as Johannan is concerned. He said that you see the histories of different races, communities, etc. in Kerala, but there was nobody to write the history of my race. So here history becomes very, very central. Something like in subsequent discourses we find history being elevated to a certain kind of, what I can say, history becomes all-pervading, and history is some kind of a revealing force. Deification of certain kind of idea of history. But in actual practice, what would happen is that it doesn't really contribute to the writing of history, but in the kind of imagination that the community had, or the people who was with him, thought that, okay, history becomes very, very significant. And that history is, on the one hand, the history of slavery, and on the other, you might as well talk about the history before the fall, before people of the oppressed caste became enslaved. And therefore, I think, not going into details of that, I just want to show how history has become really significant. And then elsewhere I have spoken about the icons of history. Even the everyday experiences of whatever is we may talk about, whatever we may talk about, could be transformed into the kind of icons of history, which has a very significant power when you recall. So these are the kind of ideas which actually gave a very substantial kind of input to his thought about the kind of salvific time, where the prophetic power and history become a really significant categories of thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So the question is, I mean, how do we look at history through individuals? But I've been asking this question. So are we actually seeing the individual? So as a historian, what I say is not an individual who is kind of throwing something to us, and we kind of try to explore or understand or reflect on that. So in fact, for me, when I visualize this kind of scholars and the figures in the 19th century, particularly in the case of Mukti Tangal, in fact, I see him like a mirror standing there and absorbing whatever comes to his way and reflecting back to us. So that is how I see him as a historian, in the sense that he's basically in a different language. He's reflecting on a long durée of cognitive multitudes that the Mapla society or the Muslims in Malabar was part of. So he's bringing a lot of these exemplars in his writings, whether it is America Kandavarundo or Nari Narabhishekam, all kinds of literature. He's actually bringing different kind of exemplars. When I say exemplars, I'm talking about a long durée history of textual production in Arabic Malayalam, and of course Arabic, starting with the early 16th century. And so there you have like very aggressive or masculine figures. And the scholars of this century, they were thinking that, okay, so these are the exemplars the Muslims in this region are kind of required of. So in the 17th century, you have softer, you have pietistic, you have melodern kind of exemplars. So when it comes to 19th century, of course, it's a very long history. I don't want to get into that. So, but when it comes to 19th century, what you find is you find scholar exemplars coming in the picture. The warriors have gone, the Sufis have gone, the saints have gone, the martyrs have gone. Now you have scholastic exemplars. No? So in fact, he also talks, Mukti Tangal actually talks about, Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Rashid, all kinds of scholars from the so-called golden period of Islam and so on and so forth. So he's reflecting back to us. So in fact, he was part of the local knowledge tradition. He was part of the larger Malabar intellectual complex. He was part of the Southeast Asian knowledge network. He was also part of the Cairo, Kerala kind of a knowledge network. So in fact, he's actually playing around this multitude of knowledge networks and kind of fishing out kind of cognitive fishing, from the Indian Ocean and say that, look, so these are the kind of possibilities that you have, and work around it. Right? So, and he also redefined the very idea of Muslim masculinity in the region. So earlier there was a different kind of masculinity. Now, refinement, like Osalla kind of, Handel. So the kind of new definition of masculinity. You don't have to be aggressive to be masculine. You don't have to be assertive to be masculine. You don't have to be violent to be masculine. So what is this new idea of masculinity in the 19th century in the writings of Mukti Tangal? So learn language that strengthens your manliness. Learn English that strengthens your manliness, masculinity. So he actually also kind of, and we should not be forgetting the fact that he's writing all these things, whatever he was writing, when there is a highly aggressive, penetrating, violent, and asphyxial kind of an empire, which is not letting the Maplas of this region sleep. And of course, being the loyalist, in fact, he keeps telling them that, okay, so you cannot have this. And he's one of the major scholars who actually says that this resentment and the peasant rebellion, the Lahla is against Islam. That is what he said. And he would also say that Paranjillengil Madavirodham, Paranjal Janavirodham. So whatever, I want to say a lot of things, and if I don't say, that's a problem. If I say, that's a problem. And there are a lot of incidents. In fact, he was not only intellectually rebuked, he was actually physically assaulted in many places in the region. And he's also influenced by the idea of travel, rihala, the Muslim idea, the Islamic idea of travel. So he's one of the first, probably one of the first scholars. In fact, he took up the notion of travel and traveling across the state. He was traveling in Travancore, he was traveling in Cochin region, he was extensively traveling in Malabar, and getting assaulted, getting cursed, and people were using all kinds of adjective and abuses. And he was also running from Talasheri. In fact, he was completely kind of against matrilineal system. In fact, so then he goes to Talasheri and says that, look, you're wrong, and people are actually throwing stones at him. Okay, so, and he's taking it. So what I say, this kind of argumentative travel that he was doing for so many years. So the last thing I want to tell you that he is also considering print technology or publication like a very, very important redemptive conduit. For me, he's not just making money. In fact, he was actually asking people to contribute. So print as a redemption. So that is one of the major things he actually worked with, and he also asked people to be part of the whole idea of printing. And he also wanted to transform the singing Muslims, in fact, who are kind of singing Arabic Malayalam songs and so on and so forth. From that singing Muslim, he wants to make them, he actually wanted them to transform into reading Muslim. The whole idea of cognition is changing. The whole idea of what is to be a good Muslim is changing here. And what is to be a good Muslim within the colonial framework is changing here. And the whole idea of resilience also is changing here. So that's Makti for me, a kind of a huge mirror, taking everything from the ocean and the land and reflecting back to us.
I just add one thing about Makti Tangal. One Justice Yusuf, he was a Brahmin convert, and he was the first CMS priest outside the Syrian Christian community. In those days, Makti Tangal work was very popular and really shocked the CMS missionaries. The Justice Yusuf published one book against the Makti Tangal, Vishuddha Venmal. That is one point.
Thank you. That's been an excellent and rich session, and we've gone in all kinds of directions, thinking about the individual, history, time, media, and so on. Now we open up the session to the audience, and we can take probably 3 rounds of questions. So, yeah, please could you pass the microphone?
Sir, in between you mentioned that Bhakti Tangal was appropriated by every sects of the Islamic community, organizations. It could be because of his mass appeal, because he propounded for a Jnana Guru. That is what is, Sridharana Guru also substituted knowledge for God, God as knowledge. And the multitude of cognitive, the parameters adhered by Bhakti Tangal. It is very similar to the interconnected net world, the generative AI world, or the Google universe, or the digital universe. It is very similar to that. So his mass appeal is because of that he proposed for spreading knowledge. The word, etymologically, the word Quran means to read or attain knowledge. So he is actually the icon of Islamic community, and why he is attacked by others. What is the reason for some others are attacking him. That is my question. Is any reason for criticism against him? I think that there is no need of criticism.
നമ്മൾ കേരളത്തിലുണ്ടായ കേരള റീഫോർമേഷനെ കുറിച്ച് പറയുമ്പോൾ when we are talking about Kerala reformation, we can see the influence of Sri Narayana Guru, Vakkom Moulavi, and many others. So when we are looking into that from a Weberian perspective, can we say that they were trying to make it more inwardly, changing from they were trying to make it more kind of an inwardly belief system, transferring it from otherworldly. The Muslim and Hindu both were promoting a kind of otherworldly mysticism as per Weber, where the roots of caste was lying. And these interventions by Sri Narayana Guru, Vakkom Moulavi, and many others were in making it inwardly. I'm not, Weber was using the word asceticism. I think it's a bit loaded word, so I'm not using that. I'm saying that they are making it a inwardly a belief system. We can see the roots in European Reformation also. There also all these things happened. Growth in the literacy rate, in gender sensitivity, and of course secularization. All those things in a different gravity happened in Kerala also. But I have hardly seen anyone seeing this from this particular perspective, and it's my attempt. So I wanted to know from the scholars whether I can proceed or not. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the panel. I thought it was excellent presentations and very relevant to the themes of the conference. I think there were many perspectives that at least I was not aware of, so I do wish to thank the panel for that. I have two questions, not addressed to anyone in particular, so you can decide who wishes to answer. One thing that struck me was that many of these reformers did not seem to engage with politics per se, right? Or at least with political entities, or were not politically mobilizing, at least outwardly, I think. Except, in fact, paradoxically, Ayangali, who is a representative in the Legislative Council. And that seemed to me a paradox, and also is there something to that, which we haven't grappled with. The second thing is about language. It is really interesting to me to see the role of language and different types of language in trying to influence the masses, right? Or at least create followers. And I say this specifically, and I wonder how you see that as then all these different strands then kind of coalescing into one vernacular also. How did that happen? Because I'm also struck, we recently did a report on education, which I'll share with some of you. But now what you see in Kerala is that actually Malayalam is the language of the poorest, at least in the education system, and it is now English, the Raja Bhasha maybe, that is being used. And then what does that imply for our cultural heritage, or all these things that we are talking about, which most people will not be able to read after some time, I fear. So that's a general comment also. Thanks.
My question to Dr. Yasser, what have been the basic differences in the approaches of these reformers, starting from Makti Thangal, Hamadani Thangal, Vakkom Moulavi? Vakkom Moulavi emphasized that ഒരു സമുദായത്തിൻ്റെ അഭിവൃദ്ധി ഉയർച്ച എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അതിലെ ഓരോ അംഗങ്ങളും വിദ്യ കൊണ്ട് അവരുടെ ബുദ്ധി പ്രകാശിക്കുന്നതാണ്. So what is the action plan for enlightening the community and sustainability of this status?
Thank you. So that's the first round. So we'll just take up the questions that you feel you need to answer.
ആദരണീയനായ നമ്മുടെ ഡെലിഗേറ്റ് ഇവിടെ സൂചിപ്പിച്ചത് മക്തി തങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് മാത്രമുള്ള, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വക്കം മൗലവിയെക്കുറിച്ച് മാത്രമുള്ള ഒരു സെഷനല്ല. അത് നമ്മൾ ഇന്നലെ ഒരുപാട് സെഷൻസ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷൻസിനെ കുറിച്ച് ഇന്നലെ നടത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾ ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത് മൗലവിയുടെ കണ്ടംപററീസ്, അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ സമകാലികർ അവരെങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ഈ കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ ആധുനികതയെ നിർണയിച്ചു അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ചലിപ്പിച്ചു എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പം ഈ വിനായക എന്ന ബുദ്ധൻ്റെ പര്യായം പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ടാണ് യഥാർത്ഥ ആദിമ അദ്വൈതവാദിയായ ബുദ്ധൻ്റെ വഴിയിലാണ് തൻ്റെ അദ്വൈതവാദം എന്ന് അദ്ദേഹം പ്രഖ്യാപിച്ചത്. അതിനെ തുടർന്നാണ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ശിഷ്യഗണങ്ങളായിട്ടുള്ള മൂലൂരും പിന്നെ സഹോദരനും മിതവാദിയും CV കുഞ്ഞിരാമനും ഒക്കെ കൂടി അയ്യാക്കുട്ടിയും ഒക്കെ കൂടി ഇതിൻ്റെ പാഠങ്ങൾ പരിവർത്തനപ്പെടുത്തുകയും പരിഭാഷകൾ നിർവഹിക്കുകയും മൂലൂരിൻ്റെ ധമ്മപദത്തിൻ്റെ 100ാം വാർഷികമാണ് എന്നുള്ള കാര്യമാണ് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത്. 1925 ഈ കുന്നുകുഴിയിൽ വെച്ചാണ് പിന്നെ വാഗ്മികൾ മകുടമാം അയ്യപ്പൻ BA-യുടെ വാക്കിനെ അനുസരിച്ചാദരാൽ ഞാനിങ്ങനെ ധർമ്മഘടിത ഗ്രന്ഥത്തിൻ ഘടികായന്ത്രം, ക്ലോക്കിനെ കുറിച്ചാണ്, ഘടികായന്ത്രം 1.25 അടിക്കവേ കൊല്ലവർഷം 1100-ാം തീയതി കുംഭമാസം 29-ന് യന്ത്രം 1.25 അടിക്കവേ ധമ്മഘടിത ഗ്രന്ഥത്തിൻ്റെ ധമ്മഘടിത തർജിമ പൂർത്തിയാക്കി. കുന്നുകുഴിയിൽ വെച്ച് രാത്രി 1 മണിക്കാണ് പുലർച്ചെ 1 മണിക്കാണ് എഴുതി വെച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പം അതിനെക്കുറിച്ചാണ്, അതിൻ്റെ 100ാം വാർഷികം എന്നാണ് പറഞ്ഞത്. പിന്നെ സഹോദരൻ്റെ 1934 പദ്യകൃതികളിലാണ് ആദ്യമായൊരു ബുദ്ധകാന്ഡം കേരള ഭാഷയിൽ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത്. ആധുനിക കാലത്ത്, ഇതിനു മുമ്പ് ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, മധ്യകാലത്തൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നിരിക്കാം, പക്ഷേ ആധുനിക കാലത്ത് അതാണെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. പിന്നെ മിതവാദിയുടെ മലബാറിൽ നടന്ന പ്രവർത്തനങ്ങൾ, ബുദ്ധ തത്വപ്രദീപികയുടെ രചന, അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ പാറാൻ സ്ക്വയർ, ഇപ്പോഴും നമുക്ക് കാലിക്കറ്റിലെ കസ്റ്റംസ് റോഡിൽ പോയാൽ ബുദ്ധവിഹാരം, മിതവാദിയും ഭിക്ഷു ധമ്മസ്കന്ദൻ നേരിട്ട് ശ്രീലങ്കയിൽ പോയി അയോധ്യദാസ പണ്ഡിതരെ പോലെ ദീക്ഷ സ്വീകരിച്ചതാണ്. എന്നിട്ട് തിരിച്ചു വന്നിട്ടാണ് ഇവിടെ മലപ്പുറത്ത് പെരിയാപുരം, താനൂരും അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ വിഹാരം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഇപ്പോഴും കാലിക്കറ്റിലെ പിന്നെ കസ്റ്റംസ് റോഡിൽ ആ വിഹാരം നമുക്ക് കാണാം. ഒരുപാട് കാര്യങ്ങളുണ്ട്, അതിനെക്കുറിച്ചുള്ള വീഡിയോസൊക്കെ യൂട്യൂബിലുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ കേരളത്തിൽ ഉള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ തന്നെയാണ് ഇവിടെ സൂചിപ്പിച്ചത്. എൻ്റെ വിഷയം ഇതായിരുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. എനിക്കൊന്ന് സമയപരിമിതി കൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ നിർത്തുകയാണ്. പ്രൊഫസർ ഉദയകുമാർ.
Thank you. Yeah. Just quickly respond to a couple of questions which came up. One is about politics. Now, of course, in the case of Sri Narayana Guru, there is no direct engagement with the state, but at the same time, you have his pronouncement that we should pray for the victory of the British in the World War because it is they are our gurus because it is they who gave us sannyas, which actually is a comment that under Brahminical domination, a lower caste person cannot actually become an ascetic. It is actually the colonial rule which made that possible. In that, there is a political gesture, certainly. And people like Palpu, who was a great petitioner to the state, and Kumaranashan, who was also a legislative assembly member, they actively participated with issues of politics. Now, the question of language which you raised is really fascinating. I think that's an issue on which, if there are further discussions later on in the years to come, we may want to spend time specifically on that. Like Narayana Guru, it's very interesting. He wrote in Sanskrit, Tamil, and Malayalam. He was a scholar in all 3 languages. And at the same time, like when Gandhi meets him, there is no common language to speak. You have to use a translator. Gandhi says, Guru, do you speak English? And Guru says, no, but do you speak Sanskrit? So there is no cosmopolitan language available. So you have to have a translator. But at the same time, at the time of I think it was the Talasheri temple, there was a debate, opposition from the Brahmins of that area about Guru consecrating temples, and Kumaranashan engaged them in Sanskrit. The debate was actually proceeding, and Narayana Guru stepped in to insist that let us actually debate in Malayalam. So these kinds of things are very interesting, and Guru began by setting up Sanskrit schools, but eventually he argued for English to be learned. He began consecrating temples, you could say, but eventually he said that now it's not temples that you need, it is schools that we need. So it's a complicated issue there. And then it's also interesting that this is the time when a public language is actually being developed. And yesterday's Korea's presentation in particular touched upon this issue as to how a certain kind of common language or public language which is fit for discourse is actually being fashioned. And that has a higher degree of Sanskrit than the Dravidian stock getting into that. I'll stop.
So I'll start with Sajida. So of course, to continue with what Uday said, in fact, I was referring to this idea of Raja Bhasha, Rajya Bhasha, Alma Bhasha, Natu Bhasha. And one thing I did not mention was Joli Bhasha. In fact, Makti Tangal also talks about, he also asked Muslims to learn foreign languages like Portuguese, Italian, German, and so on and so forth. In fact, so according to him, all these things will actually create huge employability among Muslims. Along with the language, he also talks about bhakti, not the way we understand bhakti is, but he talks about a different kind of a bhakti. He starts with the idea of Atma Bhakti, that means the self-respect or self-love. Then he talks about Raja Bhakti. Then he talks about Veda Bhakti. Then he talks about Nat Bhakti and so on and so forth. So in fact, he's kind of shaping the multitude of belongings a Mapla should have in this period. So the question of state, of course, when we talk about Makti Tangal, we should not forget the fact that there were other enormous number of scholars who are also directly engaging with the colonial state. When we broaden the definition of politics and in the Ulamite engagement with the politics, of course, in fact, we have people like William Gould Qadi, and of course, in fact, we have Ali Musliar and so on and so forth. So there were a set of scholars who were continuously and consistently and rigorously engaging with the colonial state. But as I said, and there are also like unverified reports that the colonial government was also sending Makti Tangal to different part of Malabar and ask them to kind of soften and mellow down the kind of resentment and the kind of anger coming from the Mapla side and asking him to ask them to stop, because this goes against Islam. That is what he says. That is one thing. And I think I kind of reflect on that. So coming back to your question, so as I said in the very beginning, that there are a lot of these commonalities and also difference. So what I understand from this literature is, so there is a very beautiful section from one of the writings of Vakkom Moulavi, where he starts with Avarakku Hridayamundu Arivilla, Kannundu Kaazhayilla, Cheviyundu Kelkilla. അവർ മൃഗങ്ങളെക്കാളും താഴെയാണ് അറിവില്ലാത്ത അന്ധകാരത്തിൽ വഴിപിഴച്ചു പോയ കൂട്ടരാണിവർ. So he's basically referring to a Muslim community or Muslim community, which is not really getting into the colonial, the modern education and so on and so forth. In fact, for him, as I said in the previous, part, that so he is trying to create or design a kind of a logical Muslim. So one of the major, of course, it's not a difference, I'll say, but he's also, Vakkom Moulavi, of course, Vakkom Moulavi is coming after Makti Tangal, and Vakkom Moulavi tries to create a kind of a logical Muslim, while Makti Tangal was the first person who tried to create a scientific and cognitive Mapla or a Muslim, in fact, through his prose literature, right? So, and what happened before was a lyrical Mapla. So, in fact, that's a very, very different question altogether, which I am addressing in my paper. Forthcoming book. So, coming back to the question there, of course, in fact, there is this continuous, attempt to appropriate Makti for so many reasons. Because, as you said, in fact, Makti, some places, in fact, he is emerging as an iconic figure, an icon for Muslim modernity and so on and so forth. But being a historian, of course, I am concerned with what is happening today, and also how they, kind of appropriating, giving half truth, kind of misinformation, so on and so forth. But here I am talking very, very precisely, being a historian, how to address this individual, how to place them in that particular context and location. Yeah, thank you.
ഈ ഭാഷയുടെ കാര്യവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് പറയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ഈ പറഞ്ഞ സോഷ്യൽ റിഫോമിൻ്റെ ഒരു കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റ് ആലോചിക്കുമ്പം മലയാളികളുടെ ഒരു ജാതിയുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട ഒരു പ്രധാന പ്രതിസന്ധിയെ മറികടക്കുന്നതിന് ഈ ഒരു പ്രത്യേക ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക് മോഡേണിറ്റി എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലൊക്കെ പലപ്പോഴും പഠിക്കപ്പെട്ടിട്ടൊക്കെ ഉള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഓരോ സമുദായങ്ങൾക്കും ഓരോ വിഭാഗങ്ങൾക്കും മേൽജാതിയെ കാണുമ്പോൾ ഓരോ വസ്തുക്കൾക്കും പ്രത്യേക രീതിയിലുള്ള പദങ്ങൾ ഉപയോഗിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു രീതി കേരളത്തിൽ വ്യാപകം. ഇപ്പം ഉദാഹരണത്തിന് ഒരു വില്യം ലോഗനൊക്കെ സൂചിപ്പിക്കുന്നുണ്ട് മലബാർ മാനുവലിനകത്ത്, ഒരു നായർ ഒരു നമ്പൂതിരിയെ കാണുമ്പോഴത്തേനും വീട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിന് അവർക്ക് അവകാശമില്ല, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവരുടെ കുട്ടികളെ മക്കളെന്ന് വിളിക്കുന്നതിനുള്ള അവകാശമില്ല. അത് അടുത്ത സ്റ്റെപ്പിലേക്ക് വരുമ്പോൾ ഒരു നായർ മുമ്പിൽ നിന്ന് ഈഴവനും അതേ രീതിക്ക് പറയുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനത്തെ ഒരു രീതിയിൽ ഭാഷയുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് ഓരോ ജാതി വിഭാഗങ്ങളും നിശ്ചിതമായിട്ടുള്ള പദങ്ങൾ പ്രയോഗിക്കണം എന്നുള്ളൊരു കാര്യം കേരളത്തിൽ വ്യാപകമായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് ഇതിൻ്റെ ഒരു കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റിൽ ഉദാഹരണമായിട്ട് പറയാൻ പറ്റുന്നതാണ്. അംബേദ്കർ ഒരു സംഭവം കോട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. പാലക്കാട് ഒറ്റപ്പാലത്ത് നടന്നൊരു സംഭവം. ഒരു ഈഴവ വിഭാഗത്തിൽപ്പെട്ട ശിവരാമൻ എന്ന് പേരുള്ളൊരു ഒരു കുട്ടിയാണ്, സ്കൂൾ പഠിക്കുന്ന ഒരു കുട്ടിയായിട്ടാണ് സൂചിപ്പിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ അദ്ദേഹം ആ പയ്യൻ കടയിൽ ചെല്ലുകയും ആ കടയിൽ ചെന്നിങ്ങനെ ഉപ്പ് എന്ന് ആവശ്യപ്പെടുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ ആ കാലത്ത് ഈഴവരായിട്ടുള്ള ആളുകൾക്ക് ഉപ്പ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിന് അവകാശമില്ല, പുളിച്ചത് എന്ന് വേണം അവർ കടയിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പൊതുജനങ്ങളുടെ മുമ്പിൽ നിന്ന് പറയും. അപ്പോൾ ഉപ്പ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞതിൻ്റെ പേരിൽ ശിവരാമനെ ഈ കടക്കാരൻ അതിക്രൂരമായ രീതിയിൽ മർദ്ദിക്കും. അങ്ങനെ ശിവരാമൻ മരണപ്പെടുകയും ചെയ്യുകയാണ്. അപ്പം ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ളൊരു ഭാഷയുടെ ഓരോ സമുദായങ്ങളും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഓരോ ജാതികളും മറ്റൊരു ജാതിയുടെ മുമ്പിൽ നിന്നുകൊണ്ട് ഇന്ന വാക്ക് തന്നെ ഉപയോഗിക്കണം എന്നുള്ളൊരു കർശനമായൊരു നിയമങ്ങളുടെയൊക്കെ ഒരു കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റിലാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ലിംഗ്വിസ്റ്റിക് മോഡേണിറ്റിയുടെയും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ രാജഭാഷ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇവരൊക്കെ മുൻപോട്ട് വെക്കുന്ന ചില ഭാഷാ പ്രയോഗങ്ങളെയൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ മനസ്സിലാക്കേണ്ടതെന്നാണ് തോന്നുന്നത്. പിന്നെ ഞാൻ ഈ നേരത്തെ സൂചിപ്പിച്ച യുസ്തേസ് യൂസഫ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ആളാണെങ്കിൽ പുതിയൊരു ഭാഷ തന്നെ അദ്ദേഹം ഇൻവെൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. ഇരഞ്ചിക്വാന എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞൊരു ഭാഷ, അതിൻ്റെ ലിപിയും ഡേറ്റും കാര്യങ്ങളും എല്ലാം അങ്ങനെ, അതായത് ഒരു മനുഷ്യൻ നിത്യജീവിതത്തിൽ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന എന്തെല്ലാമാണോ അതെല്ലാം പുതിയതായിട്ട് അദ്ദേഹം നിർമ്മിച്ചതും നമ്മളിങ്ങനെ നമ്മുടെ ഈ തിരുവിതാംകൂറിൽ തന്നെ നടന്നൊരു സംഭവം. അപ്പോൾ ഈ ഭക്ഷണത്തിൻ്റെ കാര്യം കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മലയാളികളുടെ എല്ലാവിധ സാമൂഹ്യ ക്രമീകരണങ്ങളും മാറ്റപ്പെടുന്ന ഈ സോഷ്യൽ റിഫോമേഴ്സിൻ്റെ ഈ ഒരു പീരീഡിൽ നമ്മൾ എന്ത് പരിശോധിച്ചാലും ഇതേ കാഴ്ചകൾ തന്നെയാണ്. ഇപ്പം ഭക്ഷണത്തിൻ്റെ കാര്യം പരിശോധിച്ചാലും അതേ രീതിക്ക് തന്നെ. ഇപ്പം SNDP മൂവ്മെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ ആദ്യ യോഗങ്ങളിൽ അവരെടുക്കുന്ന തീരുമാനം എങ്ങനെ സദ്യ ഉണ്ണാം, എങ്ങനെയുള്ളൊരു അത് ഈഴവരെ പഠിപ്പിക്കണം എന്നുള്ളൊരു കാര്യം. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പൊയ്യലപ്പച്ചനാണെങ്കിൽ തുണി അലക്കുന്നതിനെക്കുറിച്ചും കുളിപ്പിക്കുന്നതിനെക്കുറിച്ചും വൃത്തിയെക്കുറിച്ചുമൊക്കെ ഉള്ള സങ്കല്പങ്ങളൊക്കെ പഠിക്കപ്പെടുന്നൊരു സാഹചര്യവും കാണും. അപ്പോൾ അത്തരത്തിലുള്ളൊരു പശ്ചാത്തലത്തിൽ നിന്നുകൊണ്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ പ്രധാനമായും ഈ വക കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചർച്ച ചെയ്യുന്നത്. പിന്നെ സാറ് സൂചിപ്പിച്ച പോലെ ഈ ബുദ്ധിസവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് അതിനകത്ത് ജാതിയില്ല എന്നുള്ളൊരു കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ പറയുമ്പോൾ ഇന്നത്തെ ഒരു കാര്യത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ പരിശോധിക്കുമ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ ഒരു വിഭാഗം ബുദ്ധിസ്റ്റുകൾ പട്ടികജാതിക്കാരായി മാറിയത് എന്നൊരു ചോദ്യം ചോദിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് നിർത്തുന്നു.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I did not respond to that. In general, you could say that these movements can be called this worldly, but the question is, what is the world? When we say this worldly, we are thinking about it in terms of an opposition between this worldly and otherworldly, transcendent and immanent. And like in Narayana Guru's language, it is not quite in those terms that he speaks about it. Like he has this very interesting short essay called Advaita Jeevidam, in which short essay, it's just like a pronouncement, in which he speaks about sukham as a major concept. Everybody is aspiring for wellness or sukham, but sukham can be that of the spirit or that of the body, and both these need to come together. And in a society's life as well, you need to have sukham of their spiritual life as well as their bodily life. Now, this is articulated really in terms of this worldly existence. It's not really referring to some other world in that sense, So in general, what you would say, what you said, I would tend to agree with that. But we need to think more about what is actually the world and how does one world this world.
So, going back to Makti, in fact, that's an interesting question, a lot of say. But one of the, if I remember correctly, so there is this particular text of him, Makti's Maneklesham, in which he says that, okay, so we have to work for Hasanatul Dunya and Hasanatul Akhirah. That means good, nice. In fact, it's kind of what you say, coterminous with what Uday just said. Sukham or nice. It has to be nice in the world and it has to be nice in the other world. Okay, so that's there. And in fact, I don't know who asked this question. So Makti Tangal actually, he clearly stated that learning and in the pursuit of knowledge is farl ain. That means it is individual's responsibility rather than the community's collective responsibility. Every able-bodied and free, and of course individual or the Muslim should really pursue the knowledge and also produce knowledge. It's not just pursuing knowledge, but also he should be part of the production of knowledge. So for the eye.
There's a question online for Professor Udayakumar. It says, it's from Dr. Asha. I was wondering how some of Professor Udayan's observations, these observations can be thought through in the context of contemporary inquiries into Islam, modernity and reform in Kerala. This concern emanates from some apprehensions. How Muslim organization literalize the concepts of reform and modernity as primarily as revival, i.e. reclaiming Islamic traditions and practices that were in vogue in the early Muslim societies, or rather of reform itself as revival or vice versa. How it is that the prominent Muslim organizations who are at the vanguard of the discourses on modernity and reform, who are not often accommodated in these discourses, more as objects of reform rather than agents, such as women. When Madam is conceived as Samudayam, to what extent can the Muslim women, the divergent, deviant Muslim sects, the lower caste Muslims, queer Muslims, etc., feel a sense of belonging to that Samudayam?
Yeah, I think this is a question where Yasser's inputs would be very, very vital. But I would like to comment on one aspect of the question, that is this invocation of some kind of pure original tradition. Like in many reform movements, you have that attempt. Reform itself is actually presented as a historical correction. Like history itself is that of coming down, declining, and you need to restore something. And this restoration takes the form of the removal of accretions which are extrinsic to the original essence of whatever we are talking about. But we know that this discursive strategy, now this is not only in the case of the Sri Narayana movement or many other movements of that kind. Even in the case of literary debates, you will find the same kind of arguments coming up. What is actually tradition? But this strategy or this discursive move of saying that we are trying to remove impurities is also a way of constructing what is actually pure. How do you discriminate between what is an impurity and what is in tune with the essence? That itself is actually a mechanism for constructing what is essential. And that I think is true about yesterday we had that discussion about Vakkom Moulavi's, Dilip actually, those two quotations with which Dilip ended his presentation, those I thought foregrounded that issue. Like on the one hand, there is a clear distinction being made between changing a machine and on the other hand, removing the historically accumulated dirt from the machine. And he says that it's only the second thing I'm concerned with. But at the same time, as Mahmoud Kuria pointed out, many of the writings which he does on Parishkaram, they were criticized precisely because of the words, like the word Parishkaram itself, which is actually a Sanskrit-derived word, which are actually being used. So the attempt at restoration is actually an attempt at invention or innovation. You invoke the authority of tradition, which is actually very important there. And then about the particular context of the how to think with it about Muslim initiatives, Yasser would have more to say.
Okay, I'm not, no, it's a very long thing and I'm not really sure how to address those concerns, but yeah, so Makti, so one of the major problems with Muslim organizations and also Muslim scholars is to problematize or place these 19th century scholars completely out of the historical context that we had of the time. Okay, so in fact, there was this references to Makti. Makti was a patriarchal kind of a person, a misogynist kind of a person. So, if that is the case, I mean, so someone has to say that Narayana Guru was the most misogynist person of the time. So, but how do we kind of, place this issue? I mean, these people, I mean, in the context of their multiple kind of subjectivity, the political context, the colonial context, and the material context, and the aspirational context, and so on and so forth. So, coming back to Makti, he has a very interesting take on the role of Muslim women in the 19th century. Of course, when he talks about the disciplines that the Muslim men and the Muslim women that they have to learn from colleges and schools, in fact, he actually categorized them in terms of the community desirability. That the Muslim men could learn engineering, Vaidyam, engineering, Krishi, and so on and so forth. And these are the kind of nursing, midwifery. So, I mean, for women. So, in fact, he categorizes. So, basically, we are actually looking at the scholars who are engaging with the kind of issues and also the resources. I mean, so intellectual resources, material resources, and also the larger, not only Muslim intellectuals and discourses around them, but also the non-Muslim discourses around them. When we look at 19th century Keralam, for example, in fact, you have enormous Malayalam correctional literatures, texts coming from the Nayak community and also the Brahmin community. So, and they were also influenced by that. So you have all kinds of literature which is kind of dialogically, influencing and shaping these people during this time. So, and of course, when we talk about Vakkom Moulavi, he has a very different kind of a take on the question of women. He was more flexible, but interestingly, we are also looking, when we look at Bhakti was highly anti-Wahhabi. In fact, he just did not like the idea of Wahhabism or the kind of what we say Salafi Islam. He just did not. In fact, he was very, very aggressively against it. In fact, he was very much against the idea of Turkey, Khilafat and Ottoman Empire and so on and so forth. But when it comes to when we look at that actually did not really influence his take on Muslim women. All right. So. The whole point I want to make is that so we have to place this reformers, the whole idea of Parishkaram, the whole idea of revival and so on and so forth, in the time and context of the period, and also the surroundings and the multiple catalysts that have to engage consistently.
So we have an option, which is that in 1 minute we handle 5 speakers, or we give all of these very intelligent and acute observations as homework for them to do. So I think we have to end the session here, I'm afraid. And there's still another 6 or 7 hands in the audience that I spotted, so which is an indication of the interest that your talks have evoked. I'd like to thank Dr. Ajay Sekhar, Professor Udayakumar, Professor Sanal Mohan, Dr. Yasser Arafath, and Dr. Vinil Paul for this extraordinarily productive session, which will help immensely in the way we frame our questions when we finally bring out the volume of the conference proceedings. So thank you, everyone.